Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai miyagor balachon yishkar be'ar kadshecha, halech tomim ufa'al tzedek, v'dover emes bilvavo, lo ragala lishono, lo asal reyehu ra'a, v'cher kolo nasa al kravo, nivze beinav nimas, v'sirei Adonai yechabed, nishma lehorav ilal yomir, kaspa l'nasan b'neshech, v'shachar anoki l'lakach, asayei lo yimahot le'olam. Naflat teres Roshenu. We've lost the crown of our kehila, our community, the crown of our yeshiva, the Keser Shem Tov, the Keser of friendship, but perhaps most of all, among the hundreds and hundreds here and thousands whose hearts have been with us through the last few difficult hours, the Ateres Roshenu, the crown of a beautiful, beautiful family. Generations, doros, doros. Chai Tammuz, this year is a fast, but it's also a day of life. Yud Ches, Kinvinyan Chai. Doros, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, following in the midos and the ways of the Halech Tamim Ufal Tzedek, one who built not just with a mind, a brilliant mind, but Valkulam, one built with a heart that was broken, but a heart that mended and mended so many others. The Kavod of Rabbi Nachum, Rabbi Meyer, as is so appropriate, to be performed by the crown, the jewels of his mishpacha, by generations who lived and continued to live, l'arich yamim v'shanim tovim.
At this time, we call Rabbi Goldin, Rav of Avat Torah, to say a parak of Tehillim.
Shreiber, asher lo alach biatzas rishonim v'derech chatoim lo amad v'moshav leitzim lo yashav ki im b'toras Adonai chefso v'soraso yege yomom v'loilo v'ya ki eit shosu al pal yemoyim asher piryo yitain bito v'yaleu lo yibo v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach Kein Harshoim Kim Kamot Asher Titfenu Ruach Al Kein Lo Yakum Rishoim Vamishpat V'chatoim V'adas Tzadikim Ki Odea Adonai Derech Tzadikim V'derech Rishoim Tovei.
At this time, we call Rabbi Yechiel Shaffer, Assistant Rabbi of Tzedek, to say a parak of Tehillim.
Lichtam David, Shomrini el ki chasisi bach. Amar Adonai, Adonai ata tovasi bal alecha. L'kdoshim asher ba'aretz hema v'adirei tochech tzibam. Yirbu atzvosam achem haru. Bal asich niskehem midam. Ubal aseh shmosam al sefasai. Adonai menas chalki v'chosi ata tamich gorali. Chavalim naflu li v'imim. Af nachlas shafra alai. Avarech es Adonai asher ya'atzani. Af leilos yisruni chivyosai. Shivisi Adonai lenegdi samid kimimini bal emot. Lechan semach libi v'yogel chvodi. Af besari yishkon levetach. Ki lo ta'azov nafshi l'sh'ol lo sitin chasidcha. Liros shachas todi'ini arachayim. Sovas mochos es ponecha. Ni'imos b'iminecha netzach.
At this time, I call Jerry Muschel to say a prayer.
Mizmor LaDavid Nairoi Lo Achaser Ben Hut Desha Yerbertini Almi Menachot Inalei Nafshi Yoshev Inacheni Mageli Tzedek Manjmo Gam Kielech Begeya Samavet Lo Irakia Talim Deshav Techa Mujan Hatecha Hemayin Nachmini Ta'adecha Lifnei Shulchan Neged Sorry, Dish Natal Hashem Moshe Kosei Riva Achtov Chesed Yerdufini Kol Yemei Chayev Shavtei Beit Meyer Muschel.
Now I call upon my mother to deliver some words of Hakarat Hatov.
We're honored here this afternoon with the presence of so many distinguished Rabbanim. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Rabbi Menachem Muschel, Rabbi Binyamin Muschel, Rabbi Shmuel Goldin, Rabbi Chaim, Rabbi Yechiel Shaffer, Rabbi Ari Jacobson, Menahel of ASHAR, Rabbi Stephen Brzezinski, Rabbi Yaakov Tendler, Rabbi Mordechai Tendler, Rabbi Mordechai Besser, Rabbi Yaakov Bienenfeld, Rabbi Ari Muschel, Rabbi Label Chaitovsky, Rabbi Ephraim Hessen. Thank you. Hakarat Hatov is something that was always so important to my father-in-law and a big value to both him and his wife, Sarah. We want to express our gratitude to those people in the community for their incredible support, chizuk, love, and attention that was showered on my father-in-law, particularly in these last few years. Those people that took it upon themselves to get him to shul on a daily basis, to eat with him Friday night or Shabbos lunch, visit him Shabbos afternoon during the week, send food every Erev Shabbos, fresh challahs or other things that would tempt him, help him with household issues, calling him every single week to say good Shabbos. You all kept him going, and for that we are so grateful. We want to acknowledge the expert medical care that allowed him to reach advanced years, years that allowed him to enjoy grandchildren and great-grandchildren who now have wonderful memories of him. And you gave him the opportunity to officiate at the marriage of a grandchild just 2 weeks ago. The outstanding clinicians, Dr. Arthur Kozin and Dr. Einat Benyaminowitz, who invested themselves in a challenging case and extended his years, as well as Dr. Leon Harris, Dr. Judy Lynn, Dr. Michelle Slifkin, Dr. Tom Fassell, who contributed greatly to his well-being. He certainly appreciated their efforts, as do we. Thank you very much.
At this time, I'd like to call upon my father to deliver Hesped.
Many of you will remember that my father spoke on so many occasions, but really perhaps his master ability, his greatest ability, I think the ability to touch people probably the most, was his ability to deal with death. Hesped, the way he was mechazik people, Hesped shloshim, pre-death. He was really a great masked. And he's gone, it's a big void, and we can't really fill that void. We can try to give the people here with this tremendous cover, here for that tremendous final cover of my father, we can try to give them a sense. We can't do it as well as my father could have. We can try to give a sense of why we think there's such a void. What's missing? Why is this year Yud Ches Tammuz very different than just yesterday Yud Zayin Tammuz? What has changed? So I'll speak as a son, speak about an Av. I'll speak not just about an Av, I'll look the prototype of Avos, fathers. And Avos, of course, refers to the three patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, but I'll broaden the category. I'll say, just very randomly or arbitrarily, I'll pick the Avos, the seven people that we mentioned, Yoshbizin, are all patriarchal figures in our history. And I think that many or all of them have something in some way that they related to my father's life. I'll start with Yosef, one of those Avos, one of the Yoshbizin. Yosef in Chumash forced his father to flee his homeland, to a land far away. And Yosef was my father who forced, I think in 1939, who said to his father, who was thinking of remaining in their homeland of Tarnov, and said, no, we have to go, we have to flee, we won't survive here. And they went, and they left Tarnov in 1939 with Yosef's tight motivation pushing them, and they left, and my father left that town, as he recounted many times, holding two things, his tefillin and his Yom Kippur mafsar. And he was Yosef also, because Yosef was a big dreamer in the Chumash. Yosef had dreams that were scorned and spurned and being unrealistic. And my father, after those 1939 years, when he came to this country and on the shores, he had dreams of chinuch. And he had dreams of doing it a certain way. And Ivrit, I have no idea where he even got that from. Maybe it was from his early days after Cheder in a gymnasia, in a Yavne, ASHAR, high-rock type school. But he wanted this dream of Ivrit, and people scorned and spurned and laughed and ridiculed, just as they had scorned Yosef. But he pressed on. And he had the Avos quality, of course, of Avram. One of the earliest psukim which describes Avram speaks of Avram and Sarah, his loyal wife, as hanefesh asher asu v'charam. The Jews, the souls that they created, that they made. Literally the people that Avram made into Jews, into Torah-observant people. How many people? And just the hours of this morning, all kinds of stories are being showered upon us, phones, text messages, and of course, upon the hundreds of other stories. How many people were made from, were made religious, were made Shomrei Torah? How many families became part of that Nefesh Asher Asu, not B'charan, but B'Munzi, by Rabbi Muschel? He was really the original, or one of the original, Kiruv rabbis. And how many of those families then produced, under his tutelage, their own educators, their own mechanechim, their own rabbanim, to perpetuate the process further? It's just such a remarkable achievement. My cousin said to me this morning, he accomplished so much, I lost sight of that. But that's what's missing. And like Avram, whose singular midah was chesed, my father just really was one of the original chesed rabbis. All kinds of kindnesses most people don't even know about. The thing is, he was called on the kinds of kind deeds. When a classmate of mine in first grade or kindergarten, and his father was killed in a plane accident, and here was Rabbi Muschel, who was a young mechanech, who had to take these two little boys, these two brothers, and try to deal with it, and try to go and make a tahara where a tahara couldn't even be made. What kind of kindness? The kind of things that his house was always open for. People who came to him, families with all kinds of troubles, with devastating illness and children of all ages, and he had to be machazek them. The house was always open. I don't mean 60 years ago, I mean 3 weeks ago. I have an employee, she's not Jewish, she hardly works in our office anymore, and she still goes to visit him. She went 2 weeks ago to visit him because she says she adores him, because she has teenage children and she values his advice. His house is always open. And he was Avram, and the house was always a house of Achnasas Orchim. Because like Avram, he had also Sarah Ishtecha Hinei Ba'ohel. He had his Sarah to support him, to support his every endeavor. Yes, she went off to work in the later years. struggled with that a little bit, but she managed to balance it and be Sarah Hinei Bala all the time. And he was like the Avi Yaakov. Yaakov was the father of many Shvatim. Each one of those tribes got a different bracha. Each one of the students of this school, these Shvatim, each got a different destiny. Each grew into a different role. Each student in ASHAR, Hirak, was guided by a different life vision to a different future. But the tribe leader, Yaakov, had to make sure that however they differ, wherever they went, their core values would always remain unshaken. The dean here, ASHAR, Hirak, of so many Shvatim, always could rest in the comfort, acknowledging that the overwhelming majority of people who passed through the halls of Hirak and ASHAR really remained true to those core values, just as Yaakov Avinu on his deathbed knew when he interacted with his children. And he, my father, was like Aaron. He was an Ohev Shalom and he was a Rodef Shalom. He tried to reconcile every type of disagreement, every type of trouble. He had husbands and wives coming time after time to his study. My mother would call us, Allah Shalom would call us and say, please don't come tonight. We can't see the cars that are in the driveway. Please don't stop by tonight. And siblings, adult siblings, young siblings, older adult siblings who would have trouble getting along, and he would work with them, Ohev Shalom. And perhaps most painfully, parents who were estranged from children, often over very visceral things, and he would somehow struggle to put them together because he followed the Av of Aaron. And on other occasions in his life, when he was called to remember Aaron's other lesson, when tragedy struck and Vayidom Aaron, and he was quiet, he didn't protest, just as Aaron had protested. And he was Yitzchak. Yitzchak had a unique challenge among the Avos, maybe not unique, but one that was been commented on uniquely. He struggled to raise children with different personalities. Yaakov and Esau were very different. They required different educational approaches. They required different mahalach. Rav Shamshon Fol Hirsch notably spoke about this. My father in his personal life had to deal with this. Now he can be in Yeshiva Shalmala, he can speak with Rav Hirsch. They can compare notes for the future educators of the next door. Mostly, he was the Av of Moshe, because really he was the educator, uneducator par excellence. As the Rav of Soloveitchik Zatzal said so many times, Moshe was distinguished as Moshe Rabbeinu. He was not necessarily the most skillful politician. He was not always the most tactful. He often didn't speak particularly well, and yet God singled him out to lead a people because it was going to be a people of Torah, a community of learning. He was going to be Moshe Rabbeinu. My father reached the assignation, whatever other skills he had or didn't have as well, political tact, but because he was going to be the vehicle for the dissemination of the Ribbono Shalom's word to a dar that was going to be raised with Torah values. And to the very last day, like Moshe Rabbeinu at the end, he remained my Rebbe. He gave a shiur in his house for women on Tuesday afternoons. I don't think it was that long ago, the last year. And he remained my Rebbe. The last 2 years we're learning B'chabrusa, the Svarim of Rabbi Binyamin Muschel, the Svarim of Chaim Sabato, of Aaron Lichtenstein. Who's going to teach me the Hebrew words now? How am I going to read these Svarim myself? Who's going to sit with me? And finally, and most significantly for the people here, he had the Av quality of David. Why? David has a famous pasuk in Tehillim and Introductory. Yamim al yidei melech tosif shnosav kimodar v'dar. May you add days to the days of a king. May his years be like generation after generation. What was David HaMelech asking for? So Rav Aaron Khan, or your Rosh Yeshiva in YU, told me, David HaMelech was saying, give me more days to be king. You know why? Because I am in every sense of the word a king, the way the Rambam defines it in Hilchos Melachim, being there for community, caring, being invested in each individual. If you can just yamim al yidei melech tosif, if to my malchus you can add days because I'm a real melech, you know why it's so important? Because shnosav b'chol dar v'dar, because each and every year I have, I can give so much more to each and every person, to each and every generation. I still have so much to add. My father had years added to his life because of this malchus, just like David did. But the malchus was the royalty that was bestowed upon him by so many people here, who treated him like a king, who took him, who brought him, who called him, who visited him, who begged for him, who cooked for him. And because you made him a king these last few years, it was really you added days and years to his life so he could be shnos of the whole dor, so he could feel that he was still invested in every single person and every generation. I want to comment, when we had his 90th birthday Shabbos some months ago, we asked each of his grandchildren to say some of the things that they were most grateful to Esther Muschel for. I just want to mention, I didn't speak that Shabbos, some of the three things that I am the most grateful for. Interestingly, some of the things that I'm most grateful for were things that at the time I found absolutely most exasperating. This is the truth. Things that made me positively insane years ago are now the things, recognizing a little bit of an older age, how grateful I am for that. We would sit, learn Chumash and Rashi. I was 6 years old, 7 years old, probably 5 years old, even pushed pretty early. We'd sit, learn Chumash Rashi, and he'd read a Rashi, and read the Rashi. He said, "What's he saying?" I said, "I don't understand." And he would say, "Read it again." And I'd read the Rashi again, and he'd say, "What's he saying?" And I'd say, "I don't understand." And he'd say, "Read it again." Long before Herb Brooks, it was torture. It was torture. But you know what? I learned how to read a Rashi. I learned how to read a Rashi, and I'm grateful now. And he was a taskmaster. And the Tehillim, the most hated, vile literature on the planet, the Tehillim, that kids today don't even know what they were. But kids learn Chumash. It was hard. I'm grateful to him. He taught me the hard way, but I learned to learn a pasuk of Chumash. I'm grateful to him for teaching me unique vocabulary. We'll call it Lishna Dekra. He always spoke, again, exasperatingly. Say something, oh, that's the Medrash, that's the Gemara, that's the Navi, and say some obscure pasuk or some obscure Gemara. Why can't you just give me an answer in English? What does it have to be a pasuk? But the truth of the matter is, he gave me a unique vocabulary. I have a normal English vocabulary, I hope. Ultimately, I picked up a medical vocabulary, which has its own sublime beauty, but he gave me a new vocabulary, Chazal, Tanakh, Midrashim, a whole new way to communicate. The great psychologist at Harvard, Steven Pinker, wrote a whole book on language. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. But this is one that he is not onto yet. The language of Lishna Dekra. For that I'm grateful. And he taught me, and I'm grateful for this also, a sense of balance. And this also is very painful. The typical scenario was a Sunday afternoon in the house. I settled down with such a gishmak. It was 1 o'clock. The Mets were playing a doubleheader, which was going to start at 1 o'clock and would end at about 7 p.m. And I could sit in front of the TV for 6 hours, gishmak. And you'd come after 2 hours and I said, there's 5 hours left to go. It's only the fourth thing of your first game. No, you can watch 3 hours. By the way, back and forth. And he said over and over, you don't understand, I'm not objecting to you watching a baseball game, but you have to have a sense of balance. It can't be 7 hours at the expense of other things. And he emphasized the sense of balance over and over. And it became to me such a lesson. Perhaps he had it because his earliest mentors and heroes really embodied that sense of balance. His first hero, he told me not long ago, was his father. His father had the foresight to send them both to a cheder and then to the gymnasium, to the secular Zionistic school, something which the Rabbanim in his town of Tarnov simply could not digest or comprehend or assimilate. But that was the sense of balance that his father had. Another of his heroes was his Rebbe, Rav Gustman, who wasn't known just for his great lumdus, but was known also for his love of the Jewish people and for his love of the state Israel. That was a balance that he admired so much. So for him, the balance became such a important, such a mantra, something so important to emphasize between secular studies, Judaic studies, between finding the time for a father and time for children, time for Torah learning and time for reading medical science. I wanted to say, since my father, everything you ever said to him would say, it's a medrash, it's a Gemara, it's a Mishnah, and you kind of groan. So I wanted to say it was only appropriate. I think he would want to be remembered, to have some of his life remembered through some Amorei Chazal that captured him. In the interest of time, instead of mentioning 5 or 6 of them, I'll just mention a couple. One of them, a Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kufav, Kol HaMerachem al HaBrios Merachim and Allah min HaShamayim. The first time the Gemara was brought to my attention by Rabbi Radinsky at a Shabbos Shuva Drasha, and I came back and told it to my father what I had heard. His face lit up, and he was so visceral with him. Kol HaMerachem al HaBrios, if you have Rahmanis for people, then they'll show Rahmanis on you for the heavens. He felt this should be the mantra not just of every doctor or physician, anybody in the healing profession, which he did feel, but any Jew in general. It was so deep with him. It captured him and what he lived for and what he lived by. When I came back from Keren B'Yavne, I was walking through the shul one day in 1972. I was just getting introduced to Brisket Torah. And I said to him, it's very appealing, I don't really understand it yet, but tell me what is so beautiful about Brisket Torah? What is all the excitement about? And he looked at me, I was just arriving at shul, he looked at me and says, because when you get more and more in Brisket Torah, what you'll see is that it's emistic. It's Amita Shel Torah. It's the true pshat. It's the beauty of Torah. And he said, my dear Michael, the Gemara says, Chosamo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Emes. God's signet ring is Emes. And if God is Emes, and that's what he lives by, we have to do that. And the Torah has to be Emes. And that's what you'll see in Brisket Torah. And he lived by that mantra of Emes. He could never have become a celebrity rabbi like the rabbis of today. The rabbis who know the shtick, the politics, the Facebook, the rabbis who know what to say, the rabbis who know how to make a ton of money from the weddings and from the thing. I mean, that was not him because he didn't see that as emistic. He just didn't see it that way. He was going to stick to Ivrit no matter what they said, because for him, he was living an emistic life. And one more Gemara, which I think captured him, which he mentioned to me many times in the last 2 years, when I had very little patience to listen to some of these different Torah. The Gemara in Psachim, Af Kuf Yud, Yosef Rimasha Egel Rotze Linok Hapora Rotze Lohanik. More than the calf wants to actually suckle, the para, the mother, actually wants to nurse the baby. Meaning, I have so much Torah to say. More than you want my Torah, I have a need to unburden myself. It pains me. I'm like that para who has so much in me to give, and yet the Egel doesn't seem to want to be manic as much as the para wants to give over. He said that over and over because he had so much Shiva. There was nothing you said that didn't call up or conjure up some memory, some Gemara. Sometimes we listened, sometimes we didn't, but always that tremendous pressure to give it out was there. So where does he go today? Daddy, where do you go? Where's your final destination? The Gemara in Bava Metzia says, and Daf Pei Hey, and with these ideas I'll conclude. In the name of Rabbi Yonasan, Kol HaMelamed es ben Chaveiro Torah, whoever teaches his fellow sons Torah, Zoche v'Yoshev v'Yeshiva Shel Mala, merits to sit in the academy on high. He taught a lot of ben Chaveiro Torah, so that's where he's going. He's going to the Yeshiva Shel Mala. Now some who are really charif, some who are really takif, some who are real hardcore learners might say, he taught a lot of kids, he taught Chumash, he taught Nabi, but to say that I'll have a place in the Yeshiva Shel Mala, with the people who learn, with the people who learn Rav Chaim's and Rashi and Tosfos and Rav Shimon Shkrabs, he's going to have a place with them? On what merit? By what right? Who can he say and point to the Rebbe Shalom and say, look at so-and-so, he's my hero, he's my role model, he's the reason that with what I did and with the contribution that I make, I have the right to sit in Yeshiva Shel Mala. So I'll tell you who's the model. I'll tell you who the role model is. I'll introduce you to somebody, many of you don't know him. His name is Rav Chia. Rav Chia was one of the Tanoim. Rav Chia was Mesader Braistos. And the Gemara says in Bava Metzia Daf Pei Hey, Reish Lakish used to mark the boundaries of the great Rabbanim's burial spot so the Kohanim wouldn't walk there. He put signs. He looked for Rav Chia's burial plot. He couldn't find it because Rav Chia was apparently too holy, too special. And Reish Lakish became disheartened. He says, me, Reish Lakish, I'm a big learner. Ribono Shalom. Lo pilpalti Torah kamoso. Did I not do all these great shetlach and pulpulim and drushes and tremendous limud just like Rav Chia did? Why can't I be zocha to find his grave? Yatzis a baskel v'amralo. The baskel voice came from the heavens and said, Torah kamoso pilpalta. You deliberate all this Torah like he did. But Torah kamoso lo ribatzta. But you didn't disseminate the Torah the way Rav Chia did. You learned it. But how much disseminating of that Torah did you do? When Rav Chanina and Rabbi Chia were arguing about some points, Rabbi Chanina said to Rabbi Chia, what are we arguing about? you have to listen to me. He said, you argue with me? He says, Chas v'chalila, what would happen if I were gone? Imishtakta Torah Yisrael, excuse me, what would happen if the Jewish people forget Torah? Imishtakta Yisrael, look what I'd be able to do. I could restore all the Torah by my shetlach, by my drushos, by my expositions. I bring the whole Torah back. Look how great I can do. So Rav Chia said to him, with me you're arguing that you could return the whole Torah back. I make sure the Torah is not forgotten from the Jewish people in the first place. What do I do, says Rav Chia? Listen to these words. I go and I sow flax. And I weave nets from the flax. And I trap deer with the nets. And I feed the meat from the animals that I catch to the orphans. And then I prepare scrolls of parchment with the skins of the animals. I write 5 chumashim on the parchments. I go to the village and I teach each of 5 children different one of the 5 chumashim. And I teach each of 6 other children one of the 6 Sidrei Mishnah of Amarnalu, and I say, by the time I return to my place and come again, teach each other the psukim, the chumashim that you learned. Teach each other the mishnayos you learned. Va'avdi, and what do I make sure? Lo yishtakach Torah in Yisrael. I make sure that Torah will not be forgotten. My wife Liz pointed out people who are being recognized here, Rabbanim. How many of those rabbis, names that she mentioned, are rabbis who got their earliest training in the halls of ASHAR, in the halls of Tyre, Iraq, and now became part of the dissemination process, now became part of Rav Chia's dream. They too are disseminating. It's growing exponentially. The Lo Tishtachach Torah Yisrael. That's what my father points to. He points to Rav Chia. And the Gemara concludes, and with this I conclude. Achvile Rabbanan, one of the rabbis said, show me the rabbi. He said, one of the rabbis who was, Midrabbanan, one of the rabbeim, the Havashich Eliyahu, that Eliyahu Navi used to frequently visit him. And he said to Eliyahu, Achvile Rabbanan, show me the rabbis, Eliyahu, please. Yisalkim and the Siftul Rakia, what the vision is of when they go up to the heavenly academy. Amar Li, Eliyahu Navi says, be careful, you can look at the vision of all of them, the chuli matzis v'stakul, but when you'll get burnt, levar miguharka de Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia's throne, you can't look at. It's too holy, you'll get burned. What's the difference between Rabbi Chia's throne, with what he did, and the throne that he was zochet, to rise to the heavens and the throne of the others? The chulu, all the other thrones, of all the other learners, of all the other Talmidei Chachamim, Uzli Malachi, the angels go and assist them as they ascend and descend, Yisalki v'nafsi, but not Rav Chia's throne. Demi nafshi, Salik v'nachis. Rav Chia's throne goes up all by itself. Nobody has to help it. Nobody has to guide it. Rav Chia, for what he accomplished, his throne rose to the heavens by itself. We say to you, Daddy, what you've accomplished was so much. What you showed us in 90 years, from that day in 1939 to the recent weeks in 2015, was so great. We look forward to leaving and seeing and imagining you, Rakia, ascend to the thrones like that of your predecessor, Rav Chia.
Looking out in this packed gymnasium with people through the doors, lining the walls, it's a true testament to the influence and impact that has had on us all. I'd like to call my Uncle Moshe to deliver to pray Hesped.
It was Saturday night, 4th of July. I just passed, but to me the meaning of Independence Day will never be the same. Last night, Motzei Shabbat, was marked by the passing of my father, who was dear and beloved to us all. My dad represented a lot of things to a lot of people. He was an educator, a rabbi, a principal, a teacher, a mentor, or even an uncle. But to me, he was always a dad. Dad was a Jew first and foremost. His ideology was simple. He wanted his family to be God-fearing Jews with the right Torah values and mitzvot. Growing up as a son, I often misunderstood the gifts he gave me. When I was younger, I was privileged to learn with him every Shabbat, whether it was Gemara or Chumash. More often than not, those classes included friends. Since our door was always open, those friends came too, and so did their parents. I remember my friend Rabbi Ari Muschel, his dad Erwin Zachar, my friend Eli Jacobson, his dad Jay Goldin, and my friend Jerry Adler and his dad Joe Adler. It was an opportunity that I never truly really appreciated until much later in life. As many of you know, I was also a bit mischievous as a child, and had my fair share of trips to the principal's office. It was quite amazing to come home to find out that Rabbi Muschel had told my dad that I was misbehaving. But Dad was different than Mom. For him, it was tough love. I can recall our differences over music, and one day watching with him the movie Mr. Holland's Opus, he cried and said to me, "Who knew?" I recall when my brother Joseph of ASHAR was younger, he came to the table one Friday night after a disagreement with my dad and raised two fingers representing a Brega symbol. My father burst out laughing and hugged him. I recall driving to shul one special morning and seeing a bear cross the road. Dad marveled and said, "Look, there's a bear." I said, "Will you please hit the accelerator and let's get out of here?" But Sundays when I got older were much more challenging. For me, living a healthy social life meant sometimes coming out really late. But no matter how late or how tired I was, he woke me up for me on Sunday morning. That was tough love. One of the greatest days for him was when I brought home my wife, Esther Muschel. She brought my parents the biggest bouquet of flowers, and Dad then took Esther for a walk. He then said to her, "It's okay, you can marry Moshe." He was rather old-fashioned, but that was his way. In their later years as grandparents, a role that my parents treasured and cherished, my dad was there for Chumashim, Siddurim, and tutoring of Jewish studies to my kids. He was able to travel with us 3 times to Israel, once for my son Marc's bar mitzvah, for the dedication of an ambulance in memory of my brother Joseph, and for Sukkot in 2005. The last trip was unique, for Dad spent Yom Kippur in yeshiva with Marc, his grandson, something that he always treasured. Last summer, at the suggestion of 2 alumni from Iraq, Esther and I hosted a party celebrating my dad with alumni and parents. He was so thrilled and moved from the outpouring of love and tributes that he even referred to his little black book, and he shared some tiny tidbits with us about that. I reminded him that these students were not merely pupils, but they were like his extended family, the fashot that he crafted. We read this week about Moshe Rabbeinu and Pinchas, who doesn't get to Eretz Israel. The parsha, which represents the end of Moshe's life, is a short one, has a short chapter. My dad too knew that his time was limited, and like Moshe, wanted to leave his mark. Less than 2 weeks ago, my dad was Masada Kedushin, officiating rabbi for his grandson Justin's wedding. In typical fashion, he stole the show, dancing with Rabbi Lipstein and surrounded by his nephew, nieces, and cousins, and the chatan and the kala. He was my dad, that is true, but he's also the father to my brothers and daughters and my sisters-in-law, Liz and Karen. These girls, together with my wife, took on numerous challenges, taking shopping for clothing or the doctor's office, and we, the boys, are so grateful. He loved his grandchildren collectively and individually, and that was special. One important quality that he taught me was Hakarat Hatov. Who here can remember receiving a Rabbi Muschel letter? The lesson was not lost on me, and I tried to follow in your footsteps, Daddy. In that spirit, my family and I want to thank Jerry Hafner for his tireless devotion to getting Dad to shul every day. Jerry, you were his angel. To Yolanda Walker and Molly Campbell, your love and care for Dad was amazing, and we can never say thanks. Lastly, to Erna Pfeffer and Gilda Greenbaum, you are amazing listeners and companions for Dad every Shabbat. My dad never got over my mom's loss, and when she passed, so did a part of him, and he never stopped crying for my brother Joseph, even now, 20 years later. Now they are united, living many children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Daddy, I'll miss you terribly on those occasions where you adorned our table with divrei Torah and singing to friends and family. I'll miss your presence in our community, where you are a fixture on the Chagim, and most especially on Rosh Hashanah. I asked Yechiel for anything I did, and I want you to know that I'll miss your wisdom and the loving bond you shared.
Among the Hesped will have sons, grandsons, but there would actually be no friends speaking today. For me, Zeta wasn't just my grandfather, he wasn't just my trusted confidant, my unlicensed psychologist, my rabbi. He was a good buddy of mine. He really never let me down like a good friend would. Moshe was talking about the tough love that he felt with Zeta as an educator. I never had that tough love. I used to run the halls of ASHAR like Amy Carter in the White House. There was, he was always there as a good friend for my Chumash plays, for my Siddur plays. Every time I was on, it's the first time my entire life I'm on an ASHAR stage without Zeta by my side. I'd like to call upon Felix Glaubach to deliver. That's great.
Don't worry about it.
As I stand before you, I feel a grief which cannot be spoken. And my pain will go on and on. And the children and the grandchildren will feel that pain. And they will miss their Zaydeh, who will make Kiddush for us tonight. He leaves us an empty chair, and that empty chair will carry over to meetings at Yeshivot and other places where he gives counsel. But let me tell you, with the passage of time, that too will pass. And why is that? It is because you are Eidim. You are Zocher. As the Eidim at a wedding, at a Chatunah Zocher, to see Tachlis, to see Nachas. You are Eidim to the legacy that Nachum leaves with his children, with his grandchildren, who are all Shomer Mitzvos and Shomer Shabbos. You know, there's a jest in the Jewish community. If Rabbi Nachum speaks, he doesn't know when to stop. Let me tell you something. When Verizon raised the phone fare, everyone complained it was so expensive. And I was very happy. I didn't care. Because if you made a phone call to Rabbi Nachum, the divrei Torah came forth from his mouth like sparkling water from a spring. And he went on, and as the good Dr. Michael said, it was this quote and that quote, and he didn't let you off the phone until you were maskim or until you added something. Like you said, you read Rashi until you knew it, man. And this was Rabbi Nachum. This was what the way he handled. Baruch Hashem, the Glaubachs have been blessed with 6 sets of machatanim. And if I had to rate each machatan or each machteinister from 0 to 10, the Muschels, but Nachum and Suri would get at least 18. They were so inspiring, they were so loving, and each of us had certain problems, and we commiserated together, and we tried to solve these problems together. Nachum, Miriam and I truly loved you, and we know you loved us. Tehillim Nishmasot Tzrura B'Tzror HaChayim.
At this time, I'd like to call upon my Aunt Esther to deliver the Hesped.
It would be remiss of me not to speak, to pay tribute to my dear, beloved father-in-law, Dad, Rabbi Nachum Muschel, Zichron Maleh. Dad, I'll try to be brief. Actually, Michael and Meyer just told me I have less than 5 minutes to speak. Funny, right? So Dad, that means I get 15 minutes according to you. All kidding aside, I'm not sure I can be that brief in order to pay you the proper kavod that you deserve. When I said yes to Moshe, also known as David's, marriage proposal 31 years ago, I was very young and didn't understand the magnitude of what it meant to be marrying into such a chashuv family. The son of Rabbi Nachum Muschel and Sarah Zichron Muschel. He was the principal of ASHAR, rabbi of Congregation Hadar. He was teacher at Azrieli Institute. He was the father to 4 accomplished sons and a husband to Sarah. What did I get myself into? I heard stories of him as a tough principal who had a black book. I also spent Shabbosim and Yom Tov at the Muschel home, and I heard many of his divrei Torah in shul and at home as well. And the conversation at home, the question often was, after the Shabbos Shuv B'drasha, well, was Dad's Dvar Torah too lengthy? Was the audience listening for that long? Did he lose them? From the beginning, he was very welcoming. As I think back now, he was happy that I was taking Moshe off his hands. And he was finally settling down. He would often describe Moshe as being in finance with a sideline in fashion consulting. As someone said at the Upper the other day, oh, Rabbi Muschel, he looks really nice in that new suit. Well, that was Moshe and his fashion consultation. Our relationship started out as tough love, but continued to grow and soften as his love for his grandchildren was boundless. He was caring and affectionate. He attended every siddur play, every chumash play. He taught a Talmud class at Yavna, the day school that the boys attended, in memory of Joseph. Zeta loved each and every grandchild in their own special way. He eagerly helped them with all their Hebrew studies, Tanakh and Gemara. When Marc entered Ramaz High School, he studied with him Tanakh, Gemara, Kashrut with him, and couldn't stop marveling about the amazing curriculum. He was madly in love with Ramaz and felt all his grandchildren should go there. He was at every Ramaz graduation, and at each one, when Rabbi Luxstein would acknowledge his presence as a renowned educator in Jewish education, not only was he shepping nachas at the accomplishments of his grandchildren, but they in turn would shed nachas at Rabbi Luxstein's acknowledgement of their grandfather's contribution to Jewish education. My dad was not only my children's mentor, but he was mine as well. He was my life coach, parenting advisor, and I could always count on him for Dvar Torah advice. He understood people and always knew what to say or do to make people feel better, whether sending a letter of condolence or congratulating people on a simcha. I would meet people all the time who'd remark, "Oh, your father-in-law, he was my teacher, and because of him, I know what I know today." Today, I not only lost my dear father-in-law, I also lost my mentor. But the Jewish community is mourning the loss of a great educator in Jewish education. His mantra was, no Jewish child should be denied a Jewish education. Dad, I know you will truly be missed by thousands of students who you loved and cared for as if they were your own. I want to thank Hashem that you were able to perform my son, Justin, and Leah's marriage to Leah just 2 weeks ago, and for all the smachot you shared with us. Jeremy, Zayda couldn't speak enough about you when you were in Israel, and the great and caring midos that you showed him when you called him each week to wish him a good Shabbos. Zayda, I know you are at peace now. I know you were with Grandma Sarah and Joseph. I am grateful you didn't suffer long. I want you to know I will truly miss you, and I ask you for mechila if I did anything to hurt you. My wish is that the example you have set in Torah, menschlichkeit, and love of family will continue as your legacy to future generations. Tibadel b'tzorah hachayim.
Through the years of going to Zeta and sitting at his round table, schmoozing with him, I get such good advice, such good wisdom that I often would write it down. And I would always email our conversations that we had, and email it to myself so I could have it saved. And I use that today to reference some of the things I spoke about. So I went into my Gmail this morning and I typed in Zeta. And I had 180 emails show up. Many of them were from myself, but a lot of them were from my Uncle Meyer. My Uncle Meyer, who would say, I just came from Zeta, give him a call. I'll be at Zeta for Shabbos, you can find me there. Zeta and I would speak about everything, so he always gave me the lowdown and the dirt on all his family. So I knew the dirty secrets, and and I'll spare most of them, but I'll say this. Meyer, he really felt, and he really saw the amount of work, the amount you did for him. It was really felt by him. And at this point, I'd like to call on Uncle Meyer to deliver a daugher Hesped.
My point in seeing daugher Hesped today is not to add to anything anybody has said already, but to try to fill the gaps of some of the things that have been said, maybe put things in different perspective. So as distinguished from my brothers who prepared their words, I decided to sit and listen, and after listening, decide what I wanted to say. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that, again in the spirit of Hakarat Hatov, that in addition to Yolanda and Molly, who were so terrific helpers to my father, one of his other aides who cared for him greatly, was very, very devoted to him, is here today, and I want to acknowledge Lisa and thank her for all her help. It's a true testament to my father that he could be so tough on these aides, and yet they all loved him. First of all, I want to say that with respect to what Felix said, that you're all Aiden. I don't want to disagree with Felix, but I don't think we're all Aiden, because we're all mishpacha, so we're pasal Eidas. There's an irony here in the fact that this Hesped, we decided partly from my father's model and other situations, not to have outside Rabbanim speak, but to limit it to the family. Because the truth is, I feel a little guilty standing up here and looking at all of you. Because I feel it's not our loss as a family. It's a community loss. It's lost to all of us. And I wish that each and every one of us in the room could have the opportunity, because I know there are so many that want to have that opportunity, to come up and say their little piece. And I look around the room and I see nods of, yes, it's so. Hopefully we'll have a time and opportunity for them. But the time is limited. So what I want to do is, listening to my two older brothers, shed some light, because I was actually surprised to discover that some people don't know my father's history. So, my father was born in 1924 in Tarnow. Michael mentioned that. He was one of three brothers. His oldest brother, Chaim, predeceased him. We're zochet to have my father's older brother, Beirsh, in the front row. He should live and be well. And my Tante Sally, who was with them in Europe. And I think there are other, and I think Tante Goldin's here, but I didn't see her. So I want to shed some light on my father's history. My father was born in 1924. His father was a winemaker, not of the Herzog Cabernet type, more of the Manischewitz. And when the war broke out in 1939, to correct Michael a little bit, all of the men in Tarnow decided they were going to leave Tarnow, but that the Germans that were invading weren't going to harm women and children. So they decided that they would run, and they would leave the women and children behind, and they would come back for them. And so all of the men of Tarnow ran, including my father's uncles, Shlomo Muschel and Chaim Muschel. They all ran, and they left their wives and children. My grandfather expected to take his oldest two sons, and Beirsh was here, and his older brother Chaim, and to leave my father with my grandmother at home. That was the plan. And as he said goodbye, as my grandfather, my namesake, said goodbye to his wife, Frimit, and my father was just about 13. He looked at him with Payas. I think he had Payas, right, Uncle Beirsh? And he said to him, Tati, you will regret this day for the rest of your life. Don't leave us. That sentence, I dare say, changed the fact that all of us today are in this room. How many missed sentences were there in World War II? But that sentence changed this room, changed the world. And my grandfather decided, and he turned to his brothers and he said, I'm taking them. And they were angry. They're going to slow us down. He said, I don't care. He took it as a simon from his youngest son, and he took them. And that's what saved my father and his family. My Tante Sally's family, on the other hand, who's a cousin, that branch of the family, like all the other men, went back. They ran from the Polish to the Russian side, and then they tried to go back to retrieve their wives and children. And because my grandfather didn't have a wife and children to retrieve, he didn't go back. And those that went back aren't here, and don't have rooms of 900 people filled with daugher Hesped. That was my father's early years. From there, they ran to the Russian front. Because they ran to the Russian front, the Russians demanded from anybody that was in their territory, they had to accept Russian citizenship. And so they sent, when the word among some of the Jews was, if you accept Russian citizenship, you'll never leave Russia. So my grandfather and his family declined Russian citizenship and spent the rest of the war in Siberia. That's where my father learned writing skills, because he was writing letters to the great leaders, demanding to the Russian leaders that they let him out of Russia. My grandfather's name. After the war in the DP camps, my father had an unusual experience. You see, my father at Bar Mitzvah, my brother Michael alluded to it, was not only learning in Cheder, but he was learning in Zion, in a Zionist gymnasia. Our grandfather wore a Schreiber, and he sent his youngest son to a Zionist gymnasia. I said to my father, what was that like? He said it was like living in New Square and going to Ramaz in the afternoon. So that was my father's experience, and he was given such a hard time about it that when he reached his bar mitzvah, the story he liked to tell, he would say, he would come to the bar mitzvah and they didn't want to give him an aliyah in the shtiebel. You think this is an invention of the year 2015. They didn't want to give him an invention in the shtiebel, so the Rav gave him a hard time, and he said to him, Nachum, was zugst? How could you do this? And my father must have been properly brainwashed. He responded, Amar Rabbi Meir, Ochal tochal v'klipa zarak. You peel an orange, you peel something that's not edible, you peel the inedible portion, you eat the edible part. He always remembers how the Rebbe responded, Rabbi Nachum, the business Rabbi Meir. Little did the Rav know. So my father was, after World War II, he taught Ivrit in the DP camps. He actually was exposed to Chaim Nachman Bialik before World War II, and he taught Ivrit in the DP camps, and that's what led to his masterful ability to educate. Just want to tell a couple of stories about him that kind of capture him. In the late 1950s, some of you have heard the story already, a very prominent Rav from Torah Masorah recommended a Rebbe to my father. Now, it's not like today. When my father hired a Rebbe, he hired the Rebbe in April to start in September. And he expected that person to show up to yeshiva every day from April until September to be trained, not for pay. And by the way, when the pay came, didn't notice much of a difference. But he expected him to come every single day. And this young man came every single day until through the summer, until 2 weeks before school started. 2 weeks before school started, the man called my father, told him he's not coming. My father was devastated. First of all, he doesn't have a Rebbe. Second of all, he had just invested 5 months in this man. He said to him, what's the story? And he said to him, my Rosh Yeshiva, very, very prominent Rosh Yeshiva from the time, said, I can't teach in your yeshiva. I said, who's your Rosh Yeshiva? So he told him. What does a young mechanech do in 1958 when that happens? Remember, he's a young mechanech. First of all, also, head of Torah Masorah said, I can't believe that mechanech, that rabbi would say that. Call the Rosh Yeshiva. Big mistake. He called them, and Rosh Yeshiva let him have it. He says, who are you? My father explained to him, I have this yeshiva, I don't have a Talmud. He says, how dare you call me? I have no relationship with you, I'm not interested in your yeshiva. Have a nice day. Hung up. My father was very upset. What did he do next? He called his Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Gustman. Rav Gustman was an underappreciated giant. And I appreciate Rav Gustman as a result of observing my father. And Rav Gustman, my father told me the story, I remember almost word for word, said to my father, first he groaned. My father said he could hear Rav Gustman's groan. He said, Rav Nachum, machnish v'meh. Don't pay any attention to the politics. Don't look to the right. Don't look to the left. keep your eye on the ball. And the ball was a ball of chinuch. I tell you that my father took these simple words of Rav Gussman, profound but simple, and kept his eye on the ball, and he picked up the ball and he ran with it. I'll tell you one more story. Years ago, I was sitting in my shul on the Upper West Side of Tzedek. A young man was staring at me, so I did what I normally do when somebody stares at me. I stared back. And he said, looks at me, and finally says to me, "Is your name Muschel?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you Rabbi Muschel's son?" I never heard that question before. He said to me, "Could you do me a favor? Could you go home, tell your father that this is my name. I went to his yeshiva in the 1970s. Tell him that I studied medicine in the University of Seattle, and I had much opportunity to stray. And every time I thought about straying, his image popped up in my head. I said to him, I know how you feel. I have the same problem." So, okay, I went home, I told my father the story. 2 years later, I'm pushing my father in a wheelchair from community synagogues early minyan. One of the elderly gentlemen, who's now elderly, came over and gave my father a warm shalom aleichem. Look at my father as I'm pushing him, I'm saying, "What's with the warm shalom aleichem? Didn't you and him have like this big fallout?" He says, "Yeah, but time heals those things." I said, "What happened? What was it about?" So he told me the story. He said he was not allowed to participate in a tuition committee, but he was allowed to sit in. And one day, he was sitting in on the tuition committee. There was a fight about a kid whose father didn't want to pay what the tuition committee wanted him to pay. And they were $50 apart. And the tuition committee turned to my father and said, "Rabbi, you are not to admit the children to school tomorrow." And as a balabas, I can understand the tuition committee's feeling that they want the rabbi to leave the finances to them. My father opened his wallet, took out $50, and said, "It's $50. Could we please move on?" The tuition committee resigned. The head of the tuition committee pulled this kid out of the school. I understand. I didn't have the wisdom of my father. 3 years later, my mother passed away. And I'm sitting next to my father in the shiva house. A young man comes to pay a shiva call. He passes through. He lives in Israel with his family. Warren is here to pay a shiva call. He's the guy that was opposite me in the shul. He gets up to leave. He wishes us divrei nechama. As he walks away, my father turns to me and he says, he never, ever, ever divulged a confidence. But he turned to me and he says, "You know the story of the Jewish community?" That's the boy. And I thought to myself, wow, we almost lost him. For $50, we almost lost him. That was my father's approach to the world. Every Jewish child matters. Everyone. Everyone. And that's why today, it's not our family loss. It's a community loss. Anybody that gives birth to somebody else's son, doesn't just speak to how the one side feels to the other. It's about the entire relationship. The one that is mechanech feels like a parent, and the one that has gotten that chinuch feels like a son or a daughter. That was my father's mantra. The two most important words in the dictionary used to say, my mother's most important word was continuity, and my father injected the word Jewish continuity. Together, the two of them were obsessed, or I should say obsessed, were completely dedicated to Jewish continuity. There are other stories, they're not for now. Just want to end by saying that in my family, we functioned as an orchestra. Everybody played a different role. Leishi was the suits. Michael was the medicine. Karen was the loyal one who never said no to me whenever I wanted to come for Shabbos. It was hard. And Elizabeth was the one, and Esther was the one who was always shopping, coming to the house with bags and bags. And Elizabeth, though, was more my sister, and this is not meant as disrespect to Michael. It was more my sister than taking care of my father. And Michael was my brother. Michael was his doctor, Elizabeth was my sister. And I think it's only appropriate for that Hakarat Hatov to the role that we all play as a symphony. Sometimes I wonder and worry and I'm concerned that maybe the music was a little flat sometimes. It could have been more harmonious. But I'm grateful for the orchestra. And I know that that is the most important thing to my father. Not just with respect to our family, but with respect to everybody here. I asked my father for Yechiel. For the times he begged me to come, and I just couldn't, wouldn't, didn't. It was sometimes challenging him a little bit. Though admittedly, he liked the word challenge, so I guess he would have to be asking for Yechiel.
I'd like to call upon my brother Binyamin to deliver Hesped.
Almost 20 years ago, at my bar mitzvah, I was leading Musaf, davening Musaf as the Shliach Tzibur, and I remember quite clearly at Young Israel, the first thing the Baal Musaf does after Ashrei is takes the Sefer Torah from the bima and brings it back to the Aron. And as I brought it from the bima to the Aron, Zayda was sitting on the side along the front row, and he said to me, as only he can, "Who's carrying who?" Just a short while ago, my brothers and cousins took Zayda from the car to this gymnasium, and we held him. I couldn't help but think, who's carrying who? Rabbi Muschel's role in shaping this community, his overwhelming contributions to education, the important part he played in so many people's lives cannot, should not, and will not be forgotten. But I stand here today as someone who didn't know him as Rabbi Muschel, simply as Zayda. My father talked about the Gemara, Kel Maleh ben Chavero. There's another Gemara, Gemara in Kedushin, which says, Kel Maleh as ben beno Torah, Maleh Avakasav Gilu Kibla Me'ar Sinai. Somebody who teaches his grandchild, his grandson, Torah, it's as if he received it from Har Sinai. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "V'hodatam levanecha v'livnei vanecha," and you will teach, you will inform your children and your grandchildren about that day at Har Sinai. Such is the importance of the grandfather teaching the grandchild Torah that the Gemara equates this relationship with the revelation at Sinai. And Rav Soloveitchik the Rav wondered about this Gemara. The commandment we recite daily in Shema is "V'shinantam levanecha." One must teach his Torah, one must teach his children Torah and the ways of God. There's no Torah obligation of a grandfather to teach his grandson. The duty belongs to the father. Yet here this Gemara says there's a special virtue in a grandfather teaching a grandson that somehow eclipses the father's teaching of the son. And the Rav explained that there are two distinct aspects involved in teaching future generations. As far as teaching Torah per se, that obligation rests primarily from father to son. That's the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. However, regarding the concept of transmitting the Torah to future generations, the mitzvah of continuing Mesorah, that aspect can only be accomplished by a grandfather teaching grandchildren. The grandchildren represent the future generation, and the grandfather has the advantage of being closer to Har Sinai than the children's father. The father can teach, the father must teach, but only the grandfather can create a bond that invokes and cements our unbroken Mesorah. And it's literally impossible for me or any of Zeta's grandchildren to think about memories of Zeta without memories of learning with him, of learning from him. These stand out most in our minds. To anyone who was watching this learning take place, it was plain to see there was simply nothing he enjoyed more in the world than teaching his grandchildren. That teaching took many forms. Over many years, the countless Shabbosos we all spent in his house, the walk to shul was not a time to catch up on small talk or discuss current events. Each of those walks, and there were many, was an opportunity Zeta seized, sometimes whether we liked it or not, to teach us, to educate us, to arrive at our destination with knowledge we didn't have before, or a lesson to take to heart, always in Hebrew, of course. The structured learning in his house, be it Parsha, Midrash, Gemara, anything from his vast wealth of knowledge, learning with us to make siyums for our bar mitzvahs, spending night after night, year after year, helping us with Chumash and Navi homework, when it often helped that he had written some of the workbooks that we were working out of. Divrei Torah at Shabbos meals, long inscriptions on Sfarim he gave us as gifts, speeches at our simchas, letters and cards he would send us on special occasions, or simply not letting us hang up the phone Friday afternoon until he told us a new insight he had thought of on the Parsha. Zeta lived to educate, and he took an unrestrained joy in educating us. He would never miss an opportunity. And with thanks to Hashem, Zeta merited to learn with his great-grandchildren as well. I remember just a few months ago, this past Pesach, when Zeta took my son Sruli aside and sat learning Pirkei Avos with him. The unadulterated joy and ecstasy he took in extending that teaching to the next generation, it was literally visible on his face the rest of Yom Tov. The pasuk I mentioned earlier, the Hodatim Levanecha V'Vnei Vanecha, you will tell your children and grandchildren about the day you stood at Har Sinai. There's actually only one other pasuk in the Torah that mentions grandparents and grandchildren. And it's very much in line with the Rav's expounding of the grandfather's role in transmitting the Torah. In the beginning of Parshas Bo, Hashem instructs Moshe, go to Paro, Bo Paro, I've hardened his heart, the hearts of his servants. And the next pasuk mentions another key part of Hashem's plan for what happens after Yetzias Mitzrayim. U'l'man tesaper ba'oznei bincha u've'bincha, es asher yisalaltem Mitzrayim v'sososai shesamti bam, vidatem ki ani Hashem. So that you tell your children and grandchildren what I did in Mitzrayim, and you will know I am Hashem. The Jewish people leaving Mitzrayim and living to tell their grandchildren the story, that's not just a consequence of the Exodus. It's an essential component of it. Remember the struggles you overcame. Remember your upbringing in a foreign land, your understanding of God's role in every aspect of your life, and make sure that your grandchildren learn your story and are raised with your values and your awe of God. This is the other component to the grandchild-grandparent relationship in the Torah. It's not just enough to sit and learn with them. They need to know your history. They need to know how your history shaped your Jewish identity and how it must shape theirs. And in that regard, Zeta was a star. We, his grandchildren, heard from him his story of survival in 1930s Europe, of running away from his hometown, the freezing winters in Siberia, the post-war camps, and of finding his way in a new country and culture. We knew how Zeta learned from his Rebbe of Gusman, how he was educated and began teaching. And of course, we knew how he came to Monsey and became one of the country's premier authorities on Jewish education. We knew and we saw how he passionately served the community for close to 60 years. And it was with all those experiences in mind that we took to heart the times when he wanted to talk to us not about learning, but about life, about values, about relationships, about leading an authentic Jewish life. Zeta was able to transmit to us from a world that he saw and grew up in, that no longer exists, to paint a picture for us and utilize his past to inform our future. Zeta was never shy about making sure his grandchildren respected teachers and elders to the highest degree, to make sure we always extended Hakarat Hatov, and he was unwavering in his demand for truth and authenticity. And Zeta loved seeing his traditions passed on to the next generations. Watching Zeta Muschel preside over Pesach Seder was like watching a king hold court. The special Haggadah, the songs, the Hallel, the Divrei Torah. This was Zeta at his finest. Educating and teaching, yes, but also imparting his past so that it would impact our future. Lamata Saper Va'azne Bincha, Uven Bincha. Zeta was a consummate educator to us, someone who instructed and imparted wisdom at every turn. But there's something else some of you may not know, others of you may not believe. Zeta was a fun grandfather. I'd like to tell you this means memories of trips to Disney World and concerts, but we know that's not the case. But there was this side to him. As much as we, the grandchildren, remember sessions in his study huddled over Mikros Gedolos, and there were many. There were also plenty of nights sitting in the den watching Wheel of Fortune. Zeta took us to Broadway shows and dinners out, and he loved baseball. I've been told that as ASHAR principal in 1969, he actually announced over the PA system when the Mets won the World Series. It was a day game. He went to baseball games. He went to a Mets-Yankees World Series game. And of course, those in our family know that Avi and I love to tell the story of how, in the summer of 1998, Avi and I were both living with Zeta and Grandma. And of course, as big baseball fans, the only thing that mattered in the summer of 1998 was Mark McGwire going after Roger Maris's home run record. And sure enough, on night in early September, McGwire was sitting on 61, waiting to hit that next one, and Avi and I were sitting watching the game in Zeta's den, just off from the study, where Zeta was busy on the phone, looking very busy, as many people know that look. And Marc McGwire comes up in his first at-bat and hits it right over the left field wall, hits number 62, and the two teenagers in the den are screaming, going crazy. He broke a years-old record. We've been waiting all season for this. We're so excited. We're carrying this commotion. And Zeta comes out looking really, really annoyed. He says, "What's going on here?" So Avi and I explained, "Well, we're sorry for the commotion, but Marc McGwire just hit a 60-second home run." And Zeta said, "And you didn't come and get me?" He was interested. He enjoyed it. He really relished making us smile, and he really loved bringing us joy. And I want to make one last point about the Gemara we started with. Whoever learns Torah with his grandchild, it's like he received it from Har Sinai. The Gemara doesn't identify who it is that received it from Har Sinai. Is the grandfather that received the Torah from Har Sinai? Or is it the grandson that received the Torah from Har Sinai? Gemara doesn't say who is the real, true beneficiary of this relationship. And looking back on 30 plus years with Zeta, I understand why. Sure, Zeta was the one enjoying the teaching. Zeta was the one fulfilling his duty. Zeta was the one who would tell us all the time how proud he was of us. But as we've all grown older, we've been able to recognize just how proud we are of him. To go anywhere in the world, meet someone who Zeta taught, who Zeta impacted, who Zeta helped through a crisis. To introduce yourself to someone and have them say, "Muschel, related to Rabbi Muschel? I have a letter he sent me 20 years ago. It still means the world to me." To see and hear and learn how much he meant to people. Stories we knew already, and many, many we didn't. And in these last years, to see how his pure devotion to the community was extended back to him, as my father and my uncle have said. It was a tribute to him to see how many people were so committed to helping him, people who reminded him how much he mattered to them. And there was no one more committed, and it needs to be said, than you, Yoni. You were often the first one there. You were sometimes the only one there. He knew how much you were there for him, and he never forgot it. Zeta, I'm sorry for all the things I meant to say and forgot to. It's actually still kind of a shock to all of us that you're gone. The massive void you're leaving behind in the community and our family will never be adequately filled, and you'll be missed more than you will know. It will be your grandchildren, our lifelong promise to you, to fulfill the words of the inscription you wrote to us in more sfarim than we can count. Dvarei asher samti b'picha, lo'imush mipicha, u'pi zaracha, u'pi zara zaracha, ne'etzav ya'u.
These steps keep on collapsing, and every family member that walks up here, I can't help but wonder, is Zeta getting back at us for always being impatient with him on the stairs? This time I'd like to call my brother Avi to deliver Hesped.
I remember at my 8th grade graduation, ASHAR had just started a new rule that or the year or two before, that at the graduation awards, the breakfast, right before the graduation, every student in the 8th grade would receive some sort of gift, some sort of plaque that would begin with an inscription, with a pasuk, with a medrash, with chazal, and would then personally describe the graduate. And the rabbi and the teachers were going through, reading off the boys and girls the inscription, and I was sitting there with my parents and my uncles and aunts and cousins, and they were always trying to guess when it was going to be my turn. And all of a sudden, one of the rabbis started off the Mishnah and Avos, V'cheser Shem Tov Ula Al Gabayin. And my parents, my uncles and aunts looked at each other and said, I think this is the one. And I didn't really get it. I said, okay, let's see. And lo and behold, it was my turn. Years later, I look back, and now I'm starting to get it. The Keser Shem Tov Ula Al Gabayin. What it means, what it meant for my entire life to walk around Monsey, to walk around the world with the name Muschel. Keser Shem Tov, it's the crown. You wear it, oh, Muschel from Monsey, your grandfather, he taught me Hebrew. I only know Hebrew because of your grandfather. Muschel from Monsey, my entire family is only formed because of your grandfather. I was literally once in a college class where the class was rowdy. We had computers back when they weren't as ubiquitous, and everybody was playing, and the teacher was able to get control of the class. He got silence, and he looks at me and says, Muschel, classroom management, I learned that from your grandfather. I thought also that I was thinking, what is the connection between Keser Shem Tov? A good name is a crown. How is a good name like a crown? And I realized that one thing that Shem Tov, when I think about Zeta, Shem Tov has in common with a crown, is that you can have each of them without working for them. They can be inherited. A monarchy is passed to a child, whether or not they're deserving. A person is a king, the child becomes a prince or a princess, automatically by birth. I was born with the name Muschel, I did nothing for it. But because of Zeta, because of Grandma, the name Muschel was so meaningful in this room to people in Monsey, to people everywhere. I just want to make 2 points to further what everybody has said. Number one is what I said again at his 90th birthday party a few months ago. One thing that I learned from Zeta is the pasuk. I remember them singing when he walked the Sefer Torah down to ASHAR. Ma'ahavti sorasecha kol hayom isichasi. How much I love Torah, the entire day, that's all I talk about. And for Zeta Muschel, kol hayom isichasi, his entire day, all he spoke about, the way he spoke, his style of communication, was, as my father said, lishon the krah. He spoke in psukim, he spoke in riddles, and you had to learn how to do that. You had to learn what he meant, you had to translate the riddles. One time on Rosh Chodesh, our family had a custom, we wore white shirts on Rosh Chodesh in ASHAR. So I was wearing a nice white shirt, I was probably in 5th or 6th grade. And over my white shirt, I had this zip-up red sweatshirt that I love to wear. So I wore my red zip-up sweatshirt over a white shirt. So Zeta noticed it. He didn't have any issues with the fashion, that wasn't Zeta's problem. But he immediately said, he looked at me and came to him, Im yu chataichem kashanim, kashela galbinu, im yadimu katol katemeriyu. He saw red and white. It didn't mean a fashion statement, it meant a pasuk. There's a pasuk about red and later it's turning to white. I have to slightly disagree with my brother about Zeta's love for baseball. Because I remember one time on Pesach we were talking about baseball, it was just opening day. But again, Zeta saw the world through the eyes, the prism of Tanakh, through Chazal. So when we're talking about baseball, he says, what are you talking about? A bat and a ball and hitting the ball? Chazal already speak about this. Zorik Kutchul Avira Ba'ikare Koi. And I had to look it up today. It's a medrash that Rashi quotes in Vayera, so we didn't even just learn it Pesach time. It was 6 months before. But Zeta invokes the Chazal, that what is it to hit a bat and a ball? It's like Hagar, who goes away from her parents in Mitzrayim, she comes back. You hit the ball, it goes back. That's what he was remembering. He wasn't thinking about baseball. He was thinking about Chazal. He was thinking about Chumash. He was thinking today, who's gonna write his Matzeva? His poetry, to use psukim, to weave psukim you never would have thought to use in different contexts. The one my father mentioned at my grandma Sarah's Levaya. To be able to tell Grandma Sarah to look at my father, at my bar mitzvah, and say, Ra'o fanecha lo filalti bi, v'hina yireh Elokim k'abesarecha. To turn the context of Yaakov and Yosef and apply it so beautifully to the post-Holocaust generation. To be able to be master my Tante Scheindel by applying her history with her son and say, Kumi si es an honor. Clever use of psukim. And of course, to stand at his own son's Levaya, and the first words out of his mouth, Tarov Yosef. That's the first point. And the second thing that I'll miss about Zayda, I noticed more this last week or two than I ever noticed in his life, is his unshakable bitachon, and how comfortable, confident he was in walking with Hashem. Everything in life he was grateful for. He never, to borrow my Uncle Meyer's terminology, he never felt entitled to anything. He was grateful. I get to be at a grandson's wedding, what a schus. A second grandson, a third grandson, it's all a schus. It's all a schus. I get to see a great-grandchild being born. What is a great-grand? Every time it was a new gift, it was a new schus. He never thought Hashem owed him anything. He never thought he deserved anything. Every time something was given to him in life, he was grateful. He had bitachon that Hashem was helping him, and he never felt Hashem owed him anything. This may not have ever been manifested more clearer than the story he told me. I was too young to remember it at the time. But when Meyer and Joseph were born, so obviously they didn't know that it was going to be twins. It was before the days of sonograms. So when there was twins, Grandma Sarah said, "Oh, look, it's two boys." So Zayda said, "Okay, it's a matana. You got a gift. You thought you had one boy. Look, you have two boys. One of them is a matana." 32 years later, Grandma Sarah came back to him and said, "So, my matana, you told me it was a matana. You told me it was a gift. You told me it was a gift. What happened to the gift?" And my father reminded me the exact line that Zayda said, "Matana almanas lahasib shmei matana." Somebody gives a gift on condition to return it. That's also called a matana, obviously borrowing from Rabbi Meir. But he believed he had to be tachon that if Hashem gave him a gift, even if it was for 32 years, he has no complaints. He has no questions for Hashem. How could you do this to me? Thank you for 32 years of Uncle Joseph. Thank you. Same thing with my grandmother. And in the last 2 weeks, when it was so obvious to me, speaking to him, that he knew that this day was coming. It was such a clear fulfillment. Gam ki eilech begeitz al-mavis. As he's staring at the Malach HaMavis, lo ira ki ato imadi. He was never rattled. He was never afraid. I spoke to him on the phone. I saw him twice in the last week. He was never afraid. He was never anxious. He was never worried. Gam ki eilech begeitz al-mavis lo ira. Ki ato imadi. He knew. He was comfortable. The pasuk in the last 2 days when I saw Zayda, just Friday with the Shabbos, I couldn't help but think, Avraham Zakin Bayomin. He was old in days. His days were old. His days counted. His days were valuable. In an era when it's a lost art to see people who don't waste so many hours a day, but to watch Zayda sitting in his study with a Chumash, with a Gemara, with a Sefer, always making valuable time. On the phone, with the Tzivur, with his pen and paper, doing his famous Nicham Avelu and Goldin. Every minute was valuable. And Baba Yamin, that Abraham lived till the very end, every minute was valuable. But last day, Friday, hard to believe, 2 days ago, I saw Zayda, and he couldn't speak very well. I said, "Can I tell you a Torah?" Sure, he couldn't speak, but he said, "Nodded, yeah." So I said, "Vayagar Moav b'nei ha'am, Vayakatz Moav b'nei Yisrael," and I said, "Achol Kedushas Levi," and he says, "Vayakatz." Where do we see that word in Chumash, Vayakatz? That Moav was embarrassed. They were disgusted. Where does that word? Where else do you see it? And I was embarrassed. I'm 30 years old. I'm supposed to be able to know these things off the top of my head. And he's 90 years old, sitting in a bed. He says, "Okay, you don't know it." Katzti b'chayai, Rivka tells me Yitzchak. On his fingertips, in the last days of his life. Just echoing what my Uncle Meyer said, today is not a personal Avelis, it's a communal Avelis. And in that regard, I find it so fitting that today is Shabbos Rebbe Thomas, that as my parents, my uncles, my Uncle Beirish begin their personal Avelis, the entire Klal Yisrael mourns with them together in the 3 weeks, in our own Avelis, joining together. They built a beautiful Yeshiva Shalmanta, Hope you could be Melas Yosher for us. As Avi was saying, Zeta was quite grateful. One of the things he was very grateful for was for daughters, daughters-in-law, granddaughters, granddaughters-in-law. You know, I guess because Muschel was so saturated with boys, you know, any chance to get a girl was real excitement for him. It's like to call Shani the first granddaughter-in-law to live in the next to husband.
As I look out over the vast sea of faces before me, I feel overwhelmed at the hashpa'ah Zeta had on so many people, and I feel humbled to stand here today to share some of my feelings and the experiences I've been privileged to share with Zeta over the course of close to 10 years. Zeta's influence and impact on me and my family began when I married Binyamin and joined the Muschel family, and we were privileged to have Zeta serve as the Masader Kedushin at our wedding. However, his influence on me and my family goes back much further than that. Not only was Zeta a huge part of our wedding, but he also had a hand in my parents' wedding in 1969, reciting a bracha under their chuppah. My grandparents, living in Muncie together with Zeta, looked to him as a source of guidance and eitzah and respected him tremendously. Additionally, he taught my mother in Torah Institute, TI, over 40 years ago, and was so proud of the relationship that was established with my grandparents in Muncie and with my parents decades before I was privileged to meet him and join his family. From the moment I entered the Muschel family, Zeta and Grandma treated me like a granddaughter. Their love, warmth, and genuine excitement at the marriage was so sincere and so heartfelt, and they made me feel so welcome. Soon our Bechor Srili was born, and Zeta and Grandma became great-grandparents, a title which they treasured and which Grandma often reminded us she never dreamed she would earn. As Srili grew older, his relationship with Zeta blossomed. It was a match made in chinuch heaven. Srili so enjoyed learning Parsha and Ivrit from his Zeta, while Zeta would kvel, as Srili's love of learning brought him so much nachas. He was so thrilled to see with his very own eyes the mantle of Torah learning and chinuch habanim that he worked so hard for years ago, being passed down midor lador to his great-grandchildren. As he said many times, Dor vi yashuvu hena, expressing his special love for the fourth generation, and he was so very proud of his great-grandchildren. Yosef, who he named after Zeta and Grandma's beloved son, Joseph, could already see the special quality and godless of his Zeta at the young age of 2. He would share the Hebrew words he had learned with Zeta, and Zeta would encourage him in the singular way that he had, always striving to use every moment as an opportunity to teach and impart his wisdom. Zeta could not do enough for his great-grandchildren, and he relished the time he spent with them. He loved visiting with them in his study, asking questions about school, singing songs together, or even playing catch with them. When Srili turned 5, Zeta sent him a beautiful card with a bracha and a nickel. Always the thoughtful educator, he wanted Srili to have something representing his age. We looked forward to Zeta's special cards and letters, sometimes in Hebrew, always written so brilliantly and eloquently, as was Zeta's way. He would give the kids old ASHAR workbooks he had in the house, or Jewish board games he found in a closet, just to be able to give them a gift and see the happiness it brought them. When the family came together to celebrate Zeta's 90th birthday in November with a Shabbos at his house, we went around the room and each family member shared a memory about Zeta and a thought about what makes him so special. Every person had a different experience and a new idea to share, which spoke so much to Zeta's total embodiment of Chanoch Hanar al Pi Darko. His relationship with each of his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren was so unique and special. At his party on Saturday night, Srili had the zechus of making a siyum in his great-grandfather's honor. It was the perfect gift, a closing of the circle that began so many years ago, with Zeta's chinuch of Srili's grandmother in TI to his chinuch of Srili's father and grandparents in ASHAR, and culminating in all the time spent learning with his great-grandson, who he held so dear. Zeta, we will all miss the special time we shared with you, learning from you, listening to the words of poetry that flowed from your mouth so beautifully, feeling your love and pride at all of our accomplishments and successes, being influenced by your unique derech hachayim and the Torah that you taught. May you be a melitz yosher for all of us, the generations that you so lovingly molded and taught with care. Tehillim and Introductory.
As much fun as it was going to Zeta and Grandma for Shabbos, it was always a very special time. It happened quite often when I got to go with my cousin Marc. Me and Marc would sit with Zeta at the table for hours and on end. We'd be singing, we'd be telling stories, we'd exchange, our highlights of the week. Sometimes we got very excited. Me and Marc would have to try to explain to Zeta what Facebook was. That was quite the conversation. We would sit drinking Kahlua and Goldin's vodka, just having the times of our life. And at this time, I'd like to call upon Marc to deliver to the Hesped.
Try to describe in words what our Zeta meant to both his family and community is nearly impossible. How can one describe a legacy so great? I look around this room and know many of you are here because of Zeta, and he somehow had an effect on you. If it was just with a warm hello or one of his long Torahs. In trying to find the words to express how I feel, my brain is flooded with so many memories of the times I spent with Zeta. I remember the countless hours I spent from my time in Yavna, all through my years at Ramaz, studying for this Chumash test or that Gemara test. With Zeta, a sugya and Gemara that I needed to prepare for a test often wasn't enough learning for him. He'd say, "What do you mean? We can't stop here. There's so much more to be learned on this topic." He'd have me read Tosfos, Rashi, and then ask me a series of questions to stir me into further conversation. I'd always continue the discussions, even if at times it seemed endless. What was required for school was often not enough for Zeta, and as I got older and gained more of an appreciation for Torah, the discussions would often become even more intense and philosophical. Zeta and I would have long conversations on the phone or in person about Judaism, spirituality, any number of topics with Zeta. He would always offer great advice, some of which I should have listened to more often. I don't know if I can point to one specific moment or memory and say, wow, that really captures who my Zeta was. The reason I say that is because with Zeta, it was never one moment. It was countless moments. I can't tell you how many times I've been down or in a bad mood, and Zeta would take something from that week's parsha, give me a pasuk or some words of Torah, and totally change my perspective and make me feel better. On the flip side, he'd also never shy away from telling you when you did something wrong, or if you should have done something differently. I always knew Zeta had high expectations of us, and it's something I always had in the back of my mind. I often still find myself thinking, is this something Zeta Muschel would be proud of? In trying to find the pasuk or words of Torah to describe Zeta, I called up one of my rabbis from my year in Israel. He reminded me of when I went to his house for Sudam Sege before Yom Kippur. He and Zeta spoke and had a conversation that I didn't find out about until this morning. Zeta, in his eternal wisdom, expressed to the rabbi of my yeshiva how the words that we say in Birvos Kriyat Shema, Zorei Tzedakot, were extremely applicable at that very moment. He explained to my rabbi what it means that Hashem is one who sows or plants kindness. It's a strange way to describe doing good deeds. What Zeta explained, and what you can find in the art scroll sitter at the bottom of the page, it says, God does not merely reward a man for his good deeds. He rewards him for the chain reaction that results in his good deeds. What my Zeta meant by this was that now he was getting repaid for something he had done decades earlier. Two parents had come to visit Zeta to discuss what school they should send their children to, and Zeta counseled them, and they sent their children to a modern Orthodox yeshiva day school called ASHAR. Zeta was thankful because that rabbi at my yeshiva was the son of those two parents who Zeta had advised decades earlier. As a result of that small bit of advice, he was now sitting in the yeshiva as my rabbi. This is only one example of the way Zeta was blending goodness and spreading kindness all over. This room is filled beyond capacity with people who have stories about Zeta that they still hold dear to this day and have shaped many facets of their family, of who their families are. Zeta was my grandfather, role model, teacher, friend, and so much more. And words can never encompass. I miss you so much already, Zeta. I'll carry you in my heart forever.
I know the hour is late and a lot of you are fasting. I just want to let you know we'll be wrapping up shortly. At this exact moment, two weeks ago today, I was walking. I had the distinct privilege and honor to walk Zeta down the aisle at my cousin Justin Elia's wedding. And it was truly a privilege to see him up there officiating over the start of your new life. The past is the past, but he was there for the beginning of your marriage and your new time. At this time, I'd like to call Justin to deliver the Hesped.
My Zeta was many things to many people. Rabbi, principal, community leader, mentor. To me, he was just my grandfather, my friend, and my greatest role model. Zeta was the person always willing to offer me his services, whether it was just tutoring me for my Talmud exams or just giving me advice on life. I will never forget the day I introduced him to my wife, Leah. He fell in love with her and immediately urged me to marry her. We were so fortunate to have him officiate at our wedding. I vividly remember my conversation with Zeta the day after. He told me how proud he was of me, how thankful he was to Leah and me for giving him what he said was the greatest night of his life. He told me it meant the world to him to have 4 generations of Muschels celebrating a wedding together, something he never thought he would see. Zeta, thank you for all your brachot. Thank you for loving me just for being your grandson. I love you, and I already miss you greatly.
This time we call upon Eli to deliver the Hesped.
She'al avicha v'yageitcha zekinecha b'yom ulach. Rashi elsewhere in Chumash tells us that the word amira, in contrast to the word haggadah, indicates lashon raka, gentle words. Zekinecha b'yom ulach. It's that soft, gentle, and loving voice of our Zayda that all of us are going to miss so much. As I think my brother Yoni mentioned, attending ASHAR for elementary school presented us with the very unique privilege of seeing Zayda quite regularly. Whether it was in shul after minyan, seeing him in the halls, or if I was bold enough to make that trip to his office, I had the opportunity to see Zayda almost every day. My conversations with Zayda then and up until recently were very meaningful and very memorable. And though there were many lessons that I learned from Zayda throughout the years, there's one lesson in particular that I want to highlight right now. Whatever it was that Zayda and I discussed, whether it was the Parsha, my schoolwork, current events, my summer plans, Zayda always asked a lot of difficult questions. He always challenged me, like Uncle Meyer said, he challenged me to understand things in a deeper and more meaningful way. He never took I don't know for an answer, and he demanded of me, he pushed me, he motivated me to come up with something intelligent to say, whether or not it was the answer that he was looking for. As my father alluded to, this was a phenomenon that in my younger years drove me crazy. But these last years, as I matured a little bit, I came to realize that Zayda instilled in me a very powerful life lesson, one that he himself had perfected and one that he lived by. And that is not to be a superficial person. Whenever we encounter things in life, whether it's a pasuk, a Maimer Chazal, a newspaper article, a scientific fact, and most importantly, another human being, Zayda understood quite well, perhaps better than anyone, that there's much more meaning that lies beneath the simple surface that you see in front of you. Zayda taught us to dig beneath that surface and to try as hard as we can to discover the treasure that lies within whatever it is that life presents us. I mentioned to my brother Avi this afternoon that it's impossible for me to hear the words of the Haftorah that we learned this afternoon and not to think of Zayda. Having davened so many years in ASHAR and times Tzibur, where Zayda always had maftir, I can still hear his voice in my ears, laying the beautiful words of the Navi Yeshaya. My hope for myself, for my family, for our community, and for Klal Yisrael is that we can fulfill for our Zayda the words of the Navi, Shem Olam et Telo, Asher Lo Yikares. He's a program.
I'd like to call upon my cousin Cayla to deliver every Hesped, the final and last Hesped.
Zayda, my grandfather, a huge part of my life. Someone who meant a lot to a lot of people. From teaching at GP camp to sitting in an office at this very school, he was part of the lives of generations. The hundreds upon hundreds, maybe even thousands of calls he would get before Shabbos every single week. But I would like to talk about my grandfather, my Zayda, Binyamin and Avi and Yoni and Eli's grandfather, Marc and Justin and Jeremy's grandfather, Sophie's grandfather, Shmuel, Yosef, Azriel, little Shendoliba's great-grandfather. I flew in this morning from being away with the information that my grandfather was extremely ill. Nothing else. I now know that I was struggling with facts that I had no knowledge of. It's a little surreal, still is. Every single grandchild and great-grandchild had a different relationship with him. From my sitting at the conference table and in the study, waiting, to Yoni's constant, loving phone calls that I would overhear at little moments before Shabbos to how proud he was of Shirley when Shirley made a see him, and he still tested it on later. The fact is that the Muschels are a clan, ever growing. It's just terrible to think that our patriarch is no longer here with his piercing stare and his demand to know what you learned this week. Zeta, I'm gonna miss you so much, even with the testing and the little saying in Hebrew 2 books that you left on the desk for me. I know we had a special relationship, and I love picking up the phone or walking into your study to watch you daven mincha, especially when us and Molly or Yolanda were the only people in the house. I don't think you knew how much. You're a strong, very strong person and educator, the person I know who's the most invested in children and their futures, and I'm so grateful to you for investing so much in me.
A few years ago, I had Zeta inscribed into one of the Quran setters I bought. I asked to inscribe it. The Quran setter on the cover says, "Dav me miyato me," know before who you stand. But inside the scripture, Zeta wrote, it's not just know before you stand. It's know what you stand for. So look out to all of you and the family. We'll keep up his nigunim and his nusach. But I ask that you keep his values, you teach his values, you teach your kids, your grandkids, and you keep the legacy of Zeta Muschel alive. Zeta, on behalf of the grandkids, I beg for you from Yechiel. For the lonely Shabbos you sent alone, we weren't there. For the nights in the hospital, we weren't there for you. For the times we missed calling you before Shabbos. Please know that we have always loved you and will always love you. Shiva will be at 7 Boxwood Lane, Shacharis, 7 o'clock, Mincha Marav, 8:15. We'll be going to the Brick Church Cemetery, the community synagogue lot. The Avelim will be exiting from this door. We ask that you leave this door specifically for the Avelim. You can exit from the rear. I'd like to call upon Rabbi Dr. Yaakov Tendler to recite the Kel Maleh.
Kel Maleh Rachamim, Shofeim v'Melomim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechama, Al Kanfei HaShechina, B'Ma'alos Kedoshim U'Tovim, Kizohar Es nishmas Moreinu Rabbi Nachum Rabbi Meyer Sholach Liolamo Ba'avo She'anachnu Mispalalim Ba'ad Hazkaras Nishmaso B'gan Eden Tehillim and Introductory Lochein Bar Harachamim Yastidehu B'Seisel Tinafav Li'Avamim V'Yitzra B'Tzra HaChayim Es Nishmaso
Adonai hu nachavaso v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'lomar amen.
Like right by the right there. You just see where it's like.
You're taking me in. Your grandson? Very your grand. Very close. You know, when I go to my mother and my father, I always stop and I see like if one time I was there, somebody who was getting married and their family was there. Oh, it's going to be on TV? You have it on YouTube? That sounds crazy.